guide. It's only now started recording. This is part 2. I'm going to talk to you about the course guide, go through the mechanics of the course, I suppose, right? So I'm still working out exactly how we're going to run this, but I have prepared the guide and updated it from the last time I taught this course. In fact, I found that I hadn't made a course guide, or whatever I made last time was because it was 2 years ago, I think, last time I taught this course. It was not kept on the new system, the so-called AUN system that I've in the meantime become an assessor of. That was a very interesting experience to do a practice assessment for other faculties in TDTU. Now all these things are kept online, so there's a kind of copying, redistribution, printing service you can access. I've updated it and I will put this on the e-learning version 2, and everything will happen on e-learning this year. In previous courses with me, you'll have probably had, if you did, most of you did, looking at the names, we had things on Google Classroom. Now Google Classroom has been folded inside e-learning version 2. It's still a pretty ugly interface, I think, but it's a little bit better than e-learning 1. So in e-learning 2, we now have the Google, what was Google Classroom embedded, but it doesn't give us the chat facility in the same way. So the commentary, or the extra material, the links and so on that I put will be in the weekly guide. Now you can see this. In fact, I can share the weekly guide with you. Share a tab. And you'll see it here. There. You'll have a, I'm sure you can find this on your own, and you'll recognize it. But this is e-learning version 2. You have announcements. I think all that's there at present is a welcome, so be welcomed. You have the link for this meet every Tuesday, except for the ones where we don't have a class. There's a couple of them coming up, midterm and so on. And then you have on the left-hand column, looking at it, the different weeks. So welcome and course description, which is here. This is a course that reads the sociology of mass media as a mode of scholarship and citizenship. It's assumed that to equip ourselves with skills for a global and digital media environment, a theory of the media must be more than media theory. And that's a key point that I'm making. We can't just confine ourselves to the theory of the media. We need other sociology, a range of sociological insights from philosophical, critical, Marxist, post-structuralist perspectives that we can bring to bear on reading practice for all media. All right, and I mean reading in a very wide sense, not just reading books, although that's crucial, right? These things are called books, and they're still, in my view, better than PDFs. But reading, you can also read a film. You can read audio. I mean, reading is a metaphor of interpretation. Reading here is understood as a metaphor that means critical attention to the social grammar and syntax of specific media languages. So like you can read a photograph, or you can read image, sound, digitally and ideologically mediated forms of communication. And our examples will be mass media in its varied forms, from pop music video to gaming, social media, newspapers and photographs and film are not out of order, but anything else as well that is mass in the sense of its duplication and distribution to the public, the population, whether it be a niche, avant-garde, experimental public, or the unwashed masses, the many millions. So we'll look at history, we'll look at media research, we'll look at change and development, cultural expression, knowledge, ideology, and creativity. I'm using the work of Walter Benjamin as a key theorist for thinking about this, and especially an essay that I want to read with you today a bit, and next week especially. The work of art in the age of its mechanical reproducibility or technical reproduction. The various translations of this text, originally written in 1935. And collected in, there's a couple of versions, and it's got different titles according to translation. Of course, it was written in German, right? So the English translation. If you wanted to read in German, or you could, that would also be very welcome. But I don't expect it. And I don't yet know, I have not yet found, I'd be very interested if someone can find a Tingviet version of that essay. There must be one. I'd be shocked if there wasn't, but if there isn't, that should be the next thing someone translates. Each week, anyway, we will have an exercise. So this is for this week, reading Walter Benjamin, or the introduction, anyway, that you've seen to talk about movable type printing and a kind of too quick history of the main media forms. And it's been very basic. But we want to get deeply into these things. Next week, I want to spend a lot more time on Walter Benjamin, talking about Walter Benjamin and talking about this essay and going through that essay. Subsequently, we will look at newspapers. We'll look at mass communication. And you see, I haven't filled out the rest of the course. So I need to do that, and I will do that. And what I can show you, though, is the course guide as a document, which I've snapped off the TDT website. I have to stop presenting this and go back to my PowerPoint. Which is here. And I hope that it's going to be big enough for you to see. There might be an issue. Obviously, you can't read this, and I'm going to go back to these things. This is about newspapers, and I want to talk about that for next week. So skip those. This is it. Is this too small? If you're on a phone, it's probably going to be too small, isn't it? Anyone? I just got a message saying messages are also recorded. So that's a new thing on the Google recording inside this system, which is good. Good news.
You can see.
You can see. Okay, so here we have the rest of the outline of the course. So stuff you already know, talk about what is mass media and culture today. Next week, talking about Walter Benjamin's essay on the work of art and the age of its mechanical reproducibility. Okay, and that'll unfold as it unfolds. The following week, I want, and I don't know how this will work in an online class, but it's because it's different when we do it in class. I want you to bring with you, to have in front of you a newspaper, right? An actual inky newspaper that you bought. Now, maybe we can't get outside and buy newspapers by then. 2 weeks, and we might be looking at 2 more weeks of lockdown. So it might be difficult for everyone to have a newspaper, but I want you to have an old newspaper or a recent newspaper or any kind of newspaper with you that we will be able to then look at. And the idea is to consider how right? In the old days, before photographs were part of a newspaper looked like this. It was texts, and we had columns. This is the Manchester Guardian, one of the oldest and longest running newspapers. It still exists. It's a terrible newspaper now, but it used to be a fighting newspaper. And you see it had these 7 columns, and this was the front page back then. And these were the many stories, and people, this is in the days of Marx. Marx was reading this exactly this paper in mid 19th century, 1850s. And of course, only later, what else was he reading? He was also reading the Calcutta General Advertiser, the Bengal, but it's still, even these papers, they had columns. And today we still have newspapers with columns. Even on the internet, when a newspaper appears, they still keep the column idea. But a way in which people talked about newspaper analysis early on was in terms of column inches per story. And the exercise I want to do in that 3rd week is to look at how many column inches per story are, how many inches, column inches or column centimeters are given to a certain story. And of course now also images take up several columns. Sometimes they run across columns, and advertisements, but they still think in terms of the layout of the page. This includes the internet in terms of newspapers on the internet in terms of columns. I mean, let's have a quick look at let me share a quick look at just the newspaper today. Let me share Nandan, today's issue of Nandan. Okay, here's the front page of the today's paper, and you see it's in 3 columns still, or 4 columns actually. Because one photograph goes across 2 columns. The photograph there of the planes, the proposal to resume domestic flights with no restriction on fully vaccinated passengers. Yay! I'll show you my fully vaccinated status and get on a plane. But if you notice, when we scroll up a little bit, the columns are still there, right? They're very crucially still there. The 4 columns for the stories, and you click through, of course, nowadays, and you couldn't do that in the old days. But the structure of the newspaper is still there. So we're going to talk about that. All right. Slowly jump back to where we were before. What were we looking at before? I'm looking at my PowerPoint. All right, when we look at columns, the thing to think of for that week is that content analysis in terms of column inches is crucial, and different topics. All right, so we can look out for them. We'll get there and we'll talk about it then. So newspapers, that's week 3. Week 4, we're looking at theory of mass communication. Well, basically, this is a whole section of several weeks on the relationship between mass media and mass culture. First of all, looking at campaigning and political radio. So Gandhi and Hitler and Orson Welles and a whole series of things. If you remember the film Citizen Kane, when I introduced that, I quickly mentioned the War of the Worlds. So I want to look at that in a lot more detail, because it was one of the first great instances of mass psychosis caused by radio. So the first one is about radio. The second one is the mass media of print and the novel. And we're going to look in detail at, actually, we're going to look at Robinson Crusoe, or of the journalist Daniel Defoe, who's very interesting, very topical right now. Daniel Defoe, he was writing like 300 years ago, but he wrote a fantastic in 1719 or 1721, I can't remember which. He wrote a journal of the plague year, which has been discussed a lot just recently because of the plague, the pandemic, COVID. But he's also the person who wrote Robinson Crusoe, which is like really crucial for thinking about Western capitalism and individual initiative and so on. But in my interpretation, it's also important for thinking about seaborne colonialism and so on, and how crucial this media story is in relation to the opening up of global capital, such that understanding the media can't only be done by only reading media theory. We need to read wider into the sociology of colonialism and capitalism. Then we'll look at photography. Photography as mass media, the reproduction of the image. And here I'm going to get you to read Ariella Azoulay's work. And she's an amazing, actually an Israeli scholar working in America. So we're not doing breaking the boycott or anything. Who writes about ethics and photography. I mentioned this a little bit, if you remember, in the anthropology course. But she's very interesting. Then we have a section on forms of mass media and their critique. The first one will be music video. I'm going to look in particular about popular music and experimental film in this. I don't know exactly where we're going to go with this yet, but I've been reading my way into, again, the work of Jean-Luc Godard, who made some documentary films about musicians and so on, but was also belongs in a way to the history of film, because he, as part of his film practice, he started what was called the Ziegler-Vertov Group Ziegler-Vertov in France. This was, and they were experimental and political filmmakers. Interestingly, he chose not to be the Eisenstein Group, but the Ziegler-Vertov Group, and some of his greatest films were made under that auspice. Then, because so much of mass media now has been taken over by network connections, of course networks pre-exist the internet, but networks as in TV channels, networks as in radio networks, and so on. There are aspects of the digital that are worth thinking about. In particular, I want to start to make critiques of some of the ways in which we talk about mass media. So I'm thinking about WikiLeaks here, Julian Assange, the Australian campaigning journalist who's still in prison for exposing US war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the whole thing about hackers and gamers and so on. Now, then, I want to make a topic of and get into the idea that we do research on the media, research media effects. And talk about the politics of that, but not just to say these are research methods, but also think about how you should do research, how we do research in media, and how sometimes the media entices us to do a kind of research for them in a way that might be market research, which isn't real research in a way. It's advertising. Right, but there's a fine line between doing research on the media and doing research that is useful to the media because it's market research. Audience studies quite often market research. And of course, the media wants to know how it's coming across. So when you do research on the media, are you able to be critical of the media if what you're doing is for the media, so to speak? You know, and of course, this is a dilemma that goes back to the very beginning of talking about any phenomenon, but it's one that we should explore. And we can do that in relationship to looking at some of the experimental uses of the essay form in the media. And I want to look at, in particular, Chris Marker's films, like La Jetée. You'll see that anyway. We'll get into that. Any discussion of media, mass media, must look at the mass media form par excellence. In a way, this form, we see it dying now because we have our TVs in our pocket and we no longer all watch the same shows at the same speed. But there was a period between, say, 1950 and 2010, not very long ago, where people watched the same channels, 4 or 5 channels in every country. There was a national broadcaster. I mean, yes, we still have a VTV, right? But everyone watched it and there wasn't an alternative. You couldn't go off and watch your own thing on YouTube or on Daily Motion or whatever. Yeah, everybody watched the same show, watched the same news, watched the same program, and an alternative was framed in relation to that mainstream as well. So television and its changes are worth considering, especially now how TV programs are consumed in a very different way. And some will say that we're in the great era of television now because some of these box sets, these serials or whatever, these TV franchises like Battlestar or Mayans or Orange is the Only, what is it? The New Black or whatever it's called, are supposedly the greatest television ever made in Hollywood. Some will dispute that, of course. Some will question that. So TV, anyway, we have to discuss TV. And we should discuss TV not just in terms of Western mainstream TV, of course, K-pop TV and Indian melodramas and so on. How do I change the screen? Right, getting into lectures 12, 13, 14, we're looking at dysfunctional and dystopic media scenes. So mainstream film, I'm going to ask you to read Fahrenheit 451, which is a novel. It was recently translated into, or it's available in Tingviet as well, but also some TV shows about that. We look at media and violence, in particular a filmmaker that comes to Ton Duc Tang occasionally, and will come in December again, Ken Farrow. He was here last year, January, just before the pandemic. I think he came January or early February and showed some of his films. He's got a new film about police deaths in police custody in the UK, out just right now, and I'm hoping we can screen that or something. And of course, art has now become a kind of mass media. If we look at the experience of artists like Anthony Gormley and Michael Landy, many others, Way and so many. They are kind of, the art world is massified in some way. And then week 15, a revision. Now, what hasn't come across in this, if you look in the right-hand column, where you've got your reading and films that you can watch, I want there to be also development of projects, case study projects in some way, which will end up in us producing something like, actually the model I have is maybe this Urban Screens reader, but to make a potentially collective publication, or at least a dossier rather than essays for your assessment. I mean, they will be essays, they'll be reports like a normal essay, but just the form will be a little more relaxed and collaborative. And I haven't decided yet in what level of groups, but maybe it will be you partner up with someone or with two people, groups of two or three, to do this. Anyway, that will be discussed much later in the course. Why do I feel like I'm forgetting something? Has anyone got any questions? I feel like there's something that I needed to say. Where's my notes?
How about the grading system?
The grading system. Let's put gravy system. Yes, the gravy. The grading system. The transcription said gravy. Okay, it's similar to every other course. There is let me see if I can put this up. I've got a rubric. I have to stop sharing that one. Then I'll share this. Oh, it's not very big. Let me try and make it bigger. Zoom 200%. Okay, yeah. All right, it's just one of these. Do you know, when I get a choice of what I can share, I can't for sure tell you that I've got the right one. So I apologize if this is something wrong. No, it's the right one, I think. Yeah. Okay, so this is a basic thing, right? You have a process, and you have a midterm assignment and a final. And process will be participation, and you'll see some of the participation happen in a few minutes. We'll start to read, and that's participation online in the classes, and maybe some small exercises, but certainly not as many as I've done previously. The midterm will be a planning exercise, like for you to plan a case study. For example, early on today, I said that someone might want to do research on the origins of lead of movable type. That would be a great research project for someone. So writing a plan for that research might be a version of the midterm. So instead of, like, usually I ask for people to write an essay plan, I'm thinking more like you'll write a plan for a case study, research into a case study. And then for the final, that will be the project-based thing, which you can do in pairs or in groups of 3. And it will be like in other courses we've done essays or zines. It'll be a report type thing, but a bit more relaxed than a formal academic essay. And we'll talk about that. That's the whole thing. So the vaguest part of this is the process, actually, because the other thing is, yes, you submit work and you get a grade, and then you can challenge it and you can discuss it back and forth. But with process, it's hard to mechanize, hard to make that work. But if you participate, comment, and talk, you will do fine on that score. Okay, so I want to stop sharing that one. Now, I see only half of the people have got their cameras on, folks. You need to have your camera on. And what I'm going to do now is stop the recording for a second.